They called them the ugly ducklings, steel giants that moved slower than a whale and looked even less graceful. Yet, these ships, called Liberty ships, would become the backbone of Allied victory in World War II. Without them, Britain would have starved, the Soviet front would have collapsed, and D-Day might never have happened. But at the start of the war, there was a massive problem. Building just one of these ships took 230 days, nearly 8 months. That was far too slow. The war wasn't waiting for anyone. German U-boats were sinking Allied cargo ships faster than new ones could be built. Every day, somewhere in the Atlantic, a freighter went up in flames. And at that rate, the Allies were going to lose. Factories worked around the clock. Thousands of men hammered, welded, and riveted, but still, it wasn't enough. The United States needed hundreds, no, thousands, of ships to replace what was lost. But the math didn't work. 230 days per ship meant disaster. And that's when a single civilian, a man who had never built a ship before, stepped forward with an idea so radical, so ridiculous, that most of the experts laughed him out of the room. He wasn't a naval engineer. He wasn't even from the shipbuilding world. Yet, in less than 2 years, his impossible idea would make ships appear every 4 days, an achievement so fast it almost looked like magic. But who was this man? And how did he do what generations of experts thought couldn't be done? To understand that, we need to go back to the desperate early months of World War II. It's 1941. Europe is burning. Nazi Germany dominates the continent. Britain is standing alone, battered but unbroken, relying on supplies from across the Atlantic. Food, oil, tanks, planes, ammunition. Everything needed to survive. The Atlantic Ocean has become a graveyard. The German Navy's deadly wolf packs, U-boat submarines, are hunting Allied convoys. Between 1939 and 1941, they sink over 3 million tons of Allied shipping. Entire crews vanish beneath the waves. Britain's imports are cut in half. The message to the Americans is clear. If Britain falls, there will be no one left to fight. So, even before officially entering the war, the United States begins the greatest industrial mobilization in history. The Maritime Commission launches a plan to mass-produce cargo ships to feed, fuel, and arm the Allied nations. But traditional shipyards are slow, old-fashioned, and overworked. Ships are built piece by piece, rivet by rivet, a process that hasn't changed much since World War I. At this pace, by the time a single ship is ready, dozens more have already been sunk. Enter Henry J. Kaiser, a man who has never built a ship in his life. A civilian contractor best known for building roads, dams, and bridges. The Hoover Dam, the Grand Coulee Dam, these were his works. Kaiser wasn't a shipbuilder, but he was something better, a builder of systems, of industries, of speed. When Kaiser looked at the problem, he didn't see shipbuilding. He saw an assembly line. Everyone told him it couldn't be done. Ships aren't cars, the expert said. You can't just roll them off a line like Model TS. But Kaiser didn't care. He'd done the impossible before. He took one look at the Maritime Commission's Liberty ship design, a simple, boxy freighter designed to carry 10,000 tons of cargo, and said, "We can do this faster." The government was skeptical. The Navy was openly dismissive. Even seasoned shipbuilders thought he was crazy. But the country was desperate, and desperation can turn crazy ideas into miracles. Kaiser set up his first shipyard in Richmond, California, in 1941. He hired anyone willing to work, men, women, and even teenagers. Most had never seen a ship before, let alone built one. And instead of teaching them the centuries-old craft of shipbuilding, he broke the process apart, simplified it, into thousands of small, repeatable steps. He introduced prefabrication, building large sections of the ship separately, then welding them together like puzzle pieces. Before this, ships were built from the keel up, one plate at a time, on the docks. It was slow and unforgiving. Kaiser's idea was to turn shipbuilding into mass production, to bring the assembly line philosophy of Detroit's auto factories to the shipyards. Each piece of the ship would be built in its own workshop all at once. When ready, cranes would lift the giant sections into place, and welders would fuse them together. It was a completely different mindset, simultaneous instruction instead of sequential, and that one shift changed everything. But even then, the odds were stacked against him. The materials were scarce. The labor was untrained. The clock was ticking. Kaiser's shipyard became living organisms. 24-hour operations, glowing under floodlights at midnight, with sparks flying like stars from thousands of welding torches. And unlike traditional shipyards filled with seasoned craftsmen, Kaisers were filled with ordinary Americans. Farmers, store clerks, and housewives, all wearing hard hats and coveralls, learning as they went. They were called Kaiser's miracle workers. And soon, the miracles began to happen. The first Liberty ship from his yard, the SS Patrick Henry, took 244 days to complete. Still too long. But Kaiser wasn't discouraged. He studied the process, found every bottleneck, every wasted minute, and eliminated it. He created training schools for welders, even for women who had never worked in industry before. He pioneered safety programs, cafeteria systems, and on-site health care, things unheard of at the time, and each ship came out faster than the last. By 1942, the time had dropped from 230 days to 60. By 1943, it was down to just over 20 days. Then came something no one believed possible. In 1942, at the Richmond shipyard, Kaiser's workers completed the SS Robert E. Peary in just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. From keel laying to launch, less than 5 days. When the ship slid into the water, thousands of workers cheered. Newspapers across the world reported it as if a miracle had occurred. The Germans couldn't believe it. Intelligence reports even questioned if the Americans had found a way to duplicate ships. What they had done wasn't a trick. It was a revolution. A civilian's impossible idea had turned the tide of war. But this was only the beginning of the story. Because behind that achievement was something even more fascinating. An entire transformation of how America fought wars, built industries, and thought about speed itself. And it all came from a man who refused to accept that it can't be done. At the height of the war, Henry Kaiser's shipyards looked like cities made of steel. Towering cranes, endless rows of hulls, and a thunder that never stopped. The sound of hammers, welders, and giant engines echoing across the bay. Day and night blurred together as tens of thousands of workers moved like clockwork, building the lifeline of a world at war. But Kaiser's true genius wasn't just speed. It was organization. He believed that even the largest problems could be broken into small, simple steps that ordinary people could master. So instead of a few skilled shipwrights doing everything, Kaiser trained thousands of workers to do one thing, and do it perfectly. Each worker became a small part of a gigantic human machine. Some fitted bulkheads, others welded plates, some painted, some tested. No one had to know the whole process. They just had to know their piece. It was efficient, it was fast, and it worked. Every day, a whistle signaled the next shift. Out poured welders, electricians, pipefitters, and machinists, men and women, white and black, immigrants and farmhands, all standing side by side. It was one of the first truly integrated industrial workforces in America. For many women, this was their first job outside the home. They became the real Rosies of riveters, learning how to weld, rivet, and lift steel beams heavier than a car. By 1943, Kaiser had opened 7 shipyards across the West Coast, in California, Oregon, and Washington, and was employing more than 250,000 people. His yards were launching ships faster than any other builder in history. But there was something else that set Kaiser apart. He believed that taking care of workers wasn't charity. It was strategy. When others saw workers as expendable, Kaiser saw them as family. He built daycare centers for mothers so they wouldn't have to quit their jobs. He opened cafeterias that served hot meals 24 hours a day. He even introduced medical clinics right inside the shipyards, where injured workers could get instant treatment. This idea, health insurance for workers, would later evolve into the Kaiser Permanente health system, one of the largest in America today. And all of this came from one idea. If you want people to work harder, treat them like they matter. The results were breathtaking. By 1943, Liberty ships were coming off the lines every few days. They weren't fancy. They were simple, square, and slow, but they did exactly what they needed to do. carried supplies across the oceans faster than the Germans could sink them. Each Liberty ship carried about 10,000 tons of cargo. And at the height of production, America was launching 2 to 3 ships per day. That meant 20,000 tons of supplies every single day, leaving for Europe and the Pacific. They carried tanks, aircraft, trucks, food, oil, ammunition, even locomotives and hospital equipment. One ship might carry 2,840 jeeps. Another, 440 tanks. Another, an entire army division's worth of supplies. The war had become a race of production. And thanks to Kaiser's methods, the Allies were finally winning that race. And then came the Robert E. Peary, the Liberty ship built in 4 days. To prove how fast his methods worked, Kaiser challenged his own shipyard teams to a race. Workers were divided into rotating shifts, sleeping in cots next to their work areas. The sections of the ship were built simultaneously in workshops spread across the yard. Every piece was labeled, numbered, and ready to go. The moment one section was done, cranes lifted it into place. Welders swarmed the joints like fireflies. Sparks rained through the air, bouncing off helmets and steel. It became a spectacle. Crowds gathered to watch as the ship grew visibly by the hour. Newspapers covered the event live. And when the Robert E. Peary slid into the water, just over 4 days after her keel was laid, the world was stunned. To many, it felt like an act of defiance, proof that democracy could outproduce dictatorship. German intelligence was so shocked that they refused to believe the reports. They thought it was propaganda. After all, it took Nazi Germany over a year to build a single U-boat. The idea that Americans could launch an ocean-going cargo ship in under a week seemed impossible. But it wasn't propaganda. It was just Kaiser's philosophy in motion. Break the impossible into parts. Teach people to master each one and never waste a second. And Kaiser didn't stop there. He started experimenting with even faster designs, helping produce the Victory ships, improved versions of the Liberty class, built for greater speed and longevity. He also pioneered modular construction, an idea that decades later would influence everything from skyscrapers to aircraft carriers. Even more interesting were the side effects of his revolution. Kaiser shipyards became training grounds for a new kind of workforce. Engineers, managers, and mechanics learned to think differently, not as craftsmen, but as system builders. The same techniques they learned building Liberty ships would later fuel the post-war boom, the factories, the cars, the highways, even the early space industry. And amid all the production records, something deeply human happened. People from all walks of life, white, black, Hispanic, Native American, Asian, worked shoulder to shoulder. Segregation was still law in much of the country, but in the shipyards, the only thing that mattered was getting the job done. Kaiser even pushed for equal pay and equal opportunity long before it became a national issue. To the outside world, it looked like chaos, a sea of workers, cranes, and smoke. But inside, it was order. Every process was timed, measured, and refined. Workers carried small booklets showing their tasks, and supervisors tracked progress using colored charts pinned on massive boards. The system looked more like a beehive than a factory. And just as bees build a hive, these workers built a fleet. In total, the United States produced 2,710 Liberty ships during the war, more than any other type of ship in history. The Liberty fleet carried 2/3 of all cargo sent overseas during the war. They were the invisible bridge across the ocean, and they made invasion, liberation, and victory possible. Winston Churchill once called the Liberty ship the vessel that won the war. But few people knew that behind those steel hulls was a vision of one civilian who dared to defy every expert. Kaiser's name never appeared on the bows of those ships, but his fingerprints were everywhere. In every weld, every seam, every launch ceremony where another Liberty ship thundered into the water. Still, even with all the success, there was tension. Some in the Navy doubted the durability of these mass-produced ships. There were rumors that welded hulls were more likely to crack under stress than traditional riveted ones. And yes, some ships did suffer brittle fractures in cold waters. But even with those flaws, the math never lied. A few ships lost were nothing compared to hundreds built. The sheer scale of production crushed the U-boat menace under its weight. By late 1944, Allied convoys were sailing across the Atlantic faster, safer, and larger than ever before. Supplies flowed like a steel river, and the German Navy was running out of targets. Every 4 days, somewhere along the American coast, another Liberty ship was born, sliding into the sea, engines rumbling, decks loaded with supplies, ready to cross the ocean and feed the fight for freedom. And all of it traced back to a man with no experience in ships, only an unshakable belief that ordinary people could do the extraordinary. By 1944, the Liberty ships had become a symbol, not of beauty, but of power. They were the quiet giants of the Allied war machine, carrying the hope of entire nations on their decks. From the frozen waters of Murmansk to the burning beaches of Normandy, their gray hulls could be seen everywhere. Convoys of hundreds crossed the Atlantic in slow, disciplined lines, each one a moving warehouse of war. Every ship carried a story of the men and women who built it, the sailors who risked their lives to guide it through torpedo-infested waters, and the unknown civilian who made it possible for these ships to exist at all. Henry Kaiser had done the impossible. When the war began, it took 230 days to build a single Liberty ship. Now, America was launching one every 4 days. What once took months could now be done in less than a week. It was industrial magic, but it wasn't magic. It was vision, discipline, and the belief that speed could be engineered. And Kaiser didn't stop with ships. His success made him one of the most influential builders in the country. He went on to produce tanks, aircraft, and even materials for the atomic age. His shipyards became templates for future production systems, influencing everything from aircraft assembly to skyscraper construction. But the true climax of this story wasn't measured in tons of steel or days saved. It was measured in lives. Each Liberty ship could feed thousands of soldiers, deliver medical supplies to the wounded, and carry fuel that kept the bombers flying and the tanks rolling. Every extra ship launch meant fewer Allied troops starving, fewer battles lost, fewer families mourning telegrams from the front. Kaiser's revolution didn't just change industry, it changed survival itself. By late 1943, the Atlantic War had turned. German U-boat losses soared. Convoys became too large, too frequent, and too well protected to stop. For every Liberty ship sunk, 3 more were already on their way. The balance had shifted. The Liberty ships, born of panic and desperation, had become an unstoppable tide. And as the Allies prepared for D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in history, those same Liberty ships carried the weapons, vehicles, and men who would storm the beaches of Normandy. The invasion's success depended on one thing: supply. Without constant flow, food, ammo, fuel, even the most heroic soldiers would have been helpless. That supply line was built on Liberty ships. It's no exaggeration to say that the road to victory in Europe was paved by Henry Kaiser's idea. When the war ended in 1945, the Liberty fleet stood as one of the greatest industrial achievements in human history. More than 2,700 ships launched. A staggering feat accomplished not by seasoned engineers, but by ordinary Americans who had never built anything bigger than a house before the war. And when peace finally came, Kaiser didn't fade into obscurity. He looked around at the empire he'd built, the shipyards, the hospitals, the workers, and decided his mission wasn't over. He turned his wartime healthcare system into Kaiser Permanente, a permanent medical service for his employees and their families. It became the first large-scale prepaid health plan in America and still exists today, serving millions. Even in peacetime, Kaiser believed that speed, organization, and care could transform lives. But there was one more twist, a poetic ending to the story of steel and speed. After the war, many Liberty ships were sold, repurposed, or scrapped. Some became merchant vessels, carrying food and supplies during the reconstruction of Europe. Others were retired quietly, rusting away in harbors around the world. A few still float today, museum ships that serve as monuments to the industrial miracle that saved civilization. When you stand on the deck of one, the steel rough and cold under your hand, it's almost impossible not to think about the people who made it happen. The women who welded under California's sun, the immigrants who swung hammers through the night, and the man who convinced a nation that speed could be built. Henry Kaiser proved something larger than any ship or factory could contain. That greatness doesn't always come from experience or tradition. Sometimes it comes from those willing to see the world differently. He didn't invent the Liberty ship. He reinvented how it was built. He took the old rhythm of industry, slow, careful, deliberate, and rewrote it into something fierce, urgent, alive. He turned the shipyard into an orchestra, each worker an instrument, each spark a note in a symphony of creation, and the world listened. By the end of the war, the United States had outproduced every Axis nation combined. While Germany struggled to repair its factories, America was building faster than bombs could destroy. The Liberty ships were proof that freedom could be manufactured, that democracy could fight not just with soldiers, but with welders, engineers, and dreamers. Even after the last Liberty ship sailed, the ripple effects of Kaiser's impossible trick never stopped. His methods inspired the rise of modern modular construction, large-scale industrial logistics, and even the techniques NASA later used for building spacecraft. In many ways, Kaiser's legacy launched more than ships. It launched a new age of building itself. But perhaps the most powerful part of his story is this. When Henry Kaiser first proposed his idea, people laughed. They said he didn't understand ships. They said mass production was for cars, not for oceans. They said it couldn't be done. And yet, 4 years later, his shipyards were launching a vessel every 4 days. Faster than anyone in history. The man who was never a shipbuilder became the greatest shipbuilder who ever lived. And in doing so, he taught the world one unforgettable lesson, that sometimes the people who know the least about how something should be done are the only ones bold enough to change it forever. The Liberty ships may have been called ugly ducklings, but in the end, they became swans of victory, silent, steadfast, and unstoppable. Every time one slid into the sea, it carried not just cargo, but the proof of what ordinary hands can do when led by extraordinary vision. As the last lines of the war faded and peace returned, one could almost imagine Henry Kaiser standing on the docks, watching another Liberty ship disappear over the horizon, the sunset reflecting off its hull, and knowing, deep down, that his impossible dream had helped save the world.